So the river district, as we're known in our state, covers about 28% of the state of Colorado. Everything from the Continental Divide, touching where it touches Wyoming, out to Utah, down to we're one of the few jurisdictions that actually follows John Wesley Powell suggested in the West, which is our jurisdiction follows watersheds within our state. So it is all of the Green River, the Yampa, the White, the main stem of the Colorado River, and the Gunnison, and all of their tributaries. And we were formed, as it says here, in 1937, really as a result of trans-mountain diversions within our state. We have today 24 different tunnels that take over 500,000 acre-feet a year to the metropolitan Front Range. And back in the 30s, when the major tunnels were started, the folks over here said, my gosh, we need some kind of advocacy organization to fight for our water. And so they created, today it would have been a nonprofit. Back then it was a government agency, right? So we have taxing authority. I'm governed, I have 15 counties that make up our region. So I'm governed by a board of 15 members who are appointed by each of the county commissioners in those 15 counties. And we're seeing you toured yesterday through Rio Blanco County. We are today here in Mesa County. You were in Garfield County. All of that is within our district. And it is actually, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful places in the continental United States to govern or work in. So we're formed, and it's really interesting to protect, conserve, develop, and use the waters that arise within our territory for the inhabitants and the environment that exists here. But we're also, this small little agency was formed back in the 30s to also represent the state and fight for our entitlement under the Colorado River Compact. And we work with the state of Colorado, right? The state has to be very sovereign and enter into any kind of a compact or other agreements regarding interstate use of the waters. But we provide technical, legal, and policy advice to the state on interstate issues. My agency has a total of 25 employees, so we're a tiny little government based in Glenwood Springs, just off the river here. And we stay remarkably busy.
I got this working.
Perfect. Okay. So what I want to try to do is just put the Colorado River in context. I know a lot of you are from outside of the basin, but if you look at in blue here is the Colorado River District boundaries. And the other blue boundary, the Southwestern Water Conservation District, those two conservation districts, water conservation districts, make up the entire western slope of Colorado. And together, that area produces roughly 70% of the annual flow in the Colorado River. So it's a water-rich region, comparatively speaking. But like any resource-rich region, we often feel like a territory. Whether we're a territory of the Front Range of Colorado or a territory of our neighbors down to the south, we haven't quite figured out. But on any given day, we are subject to all sorts of raids, if you will. In black on this map are all of the areas that Colorado River water is used outside of the actual river basin. So it's the entire metropolitan Front Range in Colorado. It also supports, I want to point out, massive amounts of agriculture in the South Platte Basin and the Arkansas Basin. So it's not just the cities, but from a city perspective, if you think about it, for instance, Denver, 50 to 60% of their water supply comes from the Colorado River. Colorado Springs, 70%. Pueblo is about 50%. You go up to Fort Collins or Greeley, and they're between 60 and 80% of their water, depending on the year. You go down to the San Juan Chama project, that's Albuquerque and the area around Albuquerque. They're very dependent upon the Colorado River. The Wasatch Front, they're just talking about Salt Lake City. There's a tremendous amount of Colorado River water that is moved with the help of the Bureau of Reclamation and the Central Utah Water Conservancy District out to the Wasatch Front. And it's really the water that is providing most of the urban growth in that region. You go down to the lower basin, and I think a lot of people are surprised. Phoenix and Tucson, you will note, are not in black. They're actually within the Colorado River Basin. But they don't have any water that they contribute to the basin. And instead they take water through the Central Arizona Project, which is that blue dotted line. That's what fuels their growth, is the Central Arizona Project, which is a large canal built or authorized by Congress in the late 60s and built after that. It has been the engine that has allowed Phoenix to be one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country. That project, we'll get into it in a little bit, but that project has had severe cutbacks in the last 2 years because of the overuse on the river. Now in the California area, you have the Imperial and Coachella Valleys, and Imperial and Coachella Valleys lie outside of the basin. They will claim that they lie inside of the basin because at one point the river burst its traditional course and went into the Salton Sea. We disagree with them. They're actually outside of the natural drainage because when water actually falls in that valley, it doesn't come back into the river. That's an important, at least in my mind, that's what makes you part of a watershed or a basin. And then you have the Colorado River Aqueduct, which feeds the metropolitan area all the way from northern Los Angeles to San Diego, and massive amounts of water that are used there. So we have all these cities, we have 40 million people, but we also have 5 million acres of irrigated agriculture, right? And that is between both, that includes 1 million acres in Mexico and 4 million acres in the United States. Very important agricultural production and quite a bit, I will say, in our district. I know you saw some of it. We're, I will just say, very proud of our agriculture here. By and large, it is family owned. About 90, when we did some economic studies on it about 4 years ago, about 95% of our agriculture is owned and operated ag. The average size of an ag operation is about 200 acres. We have valleys like this one that have high value crops like peaches and grapes. We also have incredible fruit trees and vineyards up in the north fork of the Gunnison. But we also grow a lot of hay, alfalfa, forage crops for our cattle. It's a remarkably diverse economic situation because you have so many families involved in agriculture. And it's very different than large parts of the Midwest or out in California. And I will say that is under threat due to the water shortages. So, you know, what's been happening throughout the West is really also been magnified here in the state of Colorado. This is just a little thing that hits home for me. That is my town's watershed burning. That's our water supply in the Grizzly Creek area, way off the Colorado River in Glenwood Canyon. That happened in 2020 when we had 3 of the biggest fires Colorado had ever seen. It destroyed our water source. We had to find alternate water source for several months and then build new filtration plants and things in order to do that. For a town of 10,000, that was pretty devastating. Hard to find the $15 million that was necessary to do that. But it is brutal, and we're seeing that more often. Here's in large part why, right? So this is a map. This is no data, but the graphic was actually prepared by the Washington Post a few years ago. This shows the temperature change between 1895 and 2018. The darker it is, the more severe the change has been. The darkest is at 5.4 degrees. You'll note that in the Colorado River Basin, and in our district in particular, you have one of the biggest areas of increased warmth in our country. Right? There's this island of heat increase. And some of our counties here, for instance, in Mesa County, saw a 4.3 degree rise Fahrenheit in that period of time. right? That is tremendously above the national average and the global average. It's very impactful, and from a lot of perspectives, yes, that means drier forests and more forest fires, but it also means a whole lot less water in the Colorado River. And so the studies have shown that for every 1 degree rise in Celsius, we have a reduction in our stream flow between 3 and 9%. I just want to say the 9% number is some of the more recent science done by the USGS. If you look at the science behind those studies, I think theirs was probably the most accurate. And so we really are looking at a 9% loss in flow in the river for every 1 degree rise Celsius in the temperature. And for our folks, they're like, well, we don't understand why that would be, right? Why is there less water as temperature rises? A lot of people hear, well, warmer air means more water in the atmosphere, larger rainfall. For us, what it has meant is that our precipitation is falling not as snow during the winter, but as rain. So our precipitation hasn't changed all that much over this period of time, but it has started to be too warm to snow. And then we have these early hot springs, which cause sublimation of the snowpack into gas, and the water never becomes a liquid and melts down into our snowpack. And so it's been a huge issue from our perspective there. But you also, I'm gonna just talk a little bit about a large project. The largest federal irrigation project in western Colorado is the Uncompahgre Valley water users. It's just south of here on the Gunnison River Basin. In 1908, the Reclamation Service built a tunnel through 11 miles from the Gunnison River over in the Uncompahgre Basin, and they bring a tremendous amount of water to irrigate 83,000 acres of land. And in that project, they have seen a growing season in the last 25 years extend 2 to 3 weeks on either end of the season. They are running their canals longer, they're diverting water longer, they're growing more crops, which is great for farmers because they have a longer growing season. It means that not only the crops are taking more water, but the riparian vegetation, the forest vegetation, and I will just say our poorly managed forest vegetation is really absorbing more water than historically was the case. And so you take that. The other issue that we've seen, and I'll get into this in some data in a minute. Here it is. So moisture, right? So we are also very dependent on in western Colorado are our seasonal monsoons. They don't add a lot of water quantity to the river flows, but what they do is they provide soil moisture as we go into the winter. So that late July through early September rainfall really has historically provided the water in the soil up in the forest and down in areas like this. But when you look, what we've had aberrations in our weather patterns where we have not had, plain and simple, not had the monsoons that we're used to, and which has caused real significant deficits in soil moisture. So if you look at, for instance, 2020, so the darker red it is, the bigger the deficit in soil moisture. It was in 2020, NOAA said that the average deficit in the Colorado River Basin was 12 to 18 inches of water missing in that soil profile, which meant the first 12 to 18 inches of snowpack that melts off the next year has to fill that soil reservoir before it makes it to the streams, right? And so in 2020, we had this miserable soil moisture condition. When we went to the runoff in 2021, the snowpack was actually about 89%, and we experienced a much lower than anticipated, about a 37% runoff into Lake Powell in the Colorado River Basin. And it was all of the factors I just identified that really created that problem. keep in mind at the same time, we're experiencing these climate change driven aridification issues. I will just say, you know, by the time 2022 rolled around, we had some nice monsoons, and it set us up for something here in 2023 where we've had very few fires, nothing of major significance, and we've had a pretty nice year. I'm a little concerned because we didn't get heavy monsoons this year in most of western Colorado and most of the Colorado River Basin. So we may be headed into yet another cycle of extreme drought next year. So that's one issue facing the basin. The other is our population, right? In the state of Colorado, we have 5.8 million people right now. Our state demographer, despite saying at some point our population is going to level out because we're not having that many babies, also says we're still going to have 7.5 million people at 2050. And the Colorado River Basin that currently has a total of 40 million people that depend on it, will be at 76 million, right? All of that creates, right, declining resource pressure, increasing population. Where does the water come from that sustains this situation? It is pretty serious from our perspective. I want to try to provide some historical context to this because we're not the first people in 2023 to recognize that we have a resource that is very variable, that is limited. And so go back in time to 1922 when we had the Colorado River Compact. You're in the state of Colorado likes to claim that it is the birthplace of the prior appropriation doctrine, right? First in time, first in right. Other states may argue with us about that, but we're pretty sure. And so we defend it within our state tremendously. And it's, I will just say, from an organization that is heavily agrarian, our ag users have the most senior water rights on the river in our state. And so we are constantly defending that prior appropriation doctrine to allow our ag users to continue to use their private property rights. But our state looked at what was happening on the Colorado River and saw massive development going on in Southern California. And they were very afraid that our Supreme Court was going to do what they did in a case in Colorado v. Wyoming just a few years before that, where they applied prior appropriation to an interstate agreement, right? So we went in and we said, hey, all 7 states, the federal government, let's sit down and let's talk. Let's talk about how we do this fairly, and let's follow not the prior appropriation doctrine, but something called equitable apportionment. Let's find something that's fair for all of us, and let's split up this resource. Now, just as a side note, it was 7 states, the federal government. They left out 30 sovereign nations, the Native American tribes. Okay, it was assumed, and we'll see this, that within each state's entitlement or each region's entitlement, the tribes had to get their water through those state entitlements. But basically did not, there's one sentence in the compact that addresses Native American reserve water rights. And it just basically says we're not doing it. So it's an interesting deal. Remarkably, it took under about 1.5 years to come up with the Colorado River Compact. It's only 3 pages long. So if you're ever interested in reading it, it's not like you have to read a huge tome. But a 3-page legal document, by its very essence, and I'm a lawyer by training, just to warn you, it is got to be completely ambiguous. It's got to be subject to multiple interpretations and vagaries, because how do you deal with something as complex as a river in 3 pages, right? And it is. And so what was the idea back then? If I can show you, well, we went in as 7 states, came out as 2 basins, right? They divided the basin between the 4 upper basin states, Utah, Wyoming, New Mexico, and Colorado, and the lower basin states or lower division states, California, Nevada, and Arizona. I will just say there's a little bit of Arizona in the upper basin. There's a little bit of Utah and New Mexico in the lower basin, so it's not quite as clean as that. But that's the general deal. And so we couldn't figure out how to do it 7 different ways. So we said, all right, let's do it in 2 ways, and let's create this fictitious boundary down at Lee Ferry we're just below what is today the Glen Canyon Dam at Lake Powell. And so that's the dividing line. And what was equitable back then was a 50-50 split on the main stem of the Colorado River. So each of those basins got an actual set amount in the compact, and I will tell you that that is a point that's going to get us in litigation in the Supreme Court in the next decade. Okay? As it said, we each get 7.5 million acre feet out of the main stem of the Colorado River. Now, the lower basin gets an extra million acre feet. That, one of those vagaries in the compact just says they get this extra million. It's clear if you read the historical minutes and the contemporaneous notes and testimony that went on in Congress and went on in all the states, that extra million acre feet was from the lower basin tributary. So the Gila, the Salt, the Virgin, water that actually originated down there, they get that million acre feet. So that seems fair. That was the 50-50. So that's only 15 million acre feet, right? But what's actually been happening is, just going back to that. So we said 15 between the two of us. Well, there was this country of Mexico that we knew we had to deal with, right? They also were on the river. We learned the hard way that you can't actually cut water off to another nation and create problems. So they said there's a provision in the compact that said, hey, and when we get to it, Mexico, whatever it is that Mexico gets, if we have a shortage on the river, the upper basin has to provide half of that shortage, and the lower basin provides the rest. But during the normal times, they just get what it is the United States agrees with Mexico. Mexico got in their compact. So this was 1922. In 1944, the compact was signed with, or the treaty was signed with Mexico. They got 1.5 million. So that puts us up at 16.5 million acre feet that is guaranteed, right, or said you're going to get this. And a river that even back then they knew was remarkably variable. And the part that I think a lot of people point out today is in the early 20s, was kind of the pinnacle of what our scientific community calls the pluvial period in the Colorado River, or a very wet period. But if you go back in time, you see these huge long periods of drought, followed by little short periods of wet, and then back into these drought cycles. You know, think about 1922. What happened between 22 and 44 when the compact or the treaty was signed with Mexico? Well, the Dust Bowl, okay? Huge drought, not just in Oklahoma where you read the story about the entire American West, right? And so the Colorado River, you would think they'd learned something, but they still guaranteed a certain amount of acre feet to Mexico at that time. So remember, that's 16.5 million acre feet out of the main stem. There's another million out of the tributaries in the lower basin. So they're saying 17.5 million that we have. And by the way, once we've developed all this, we're going to come back together in 30 years and divide up the rest. That was the best provision in the compact, that they were quite convinced that they were going to get to divide up more water between the parties. So what's really happened over the last 10 years is a 60-30 split between the lower basin and the upper basin. The upper basin has never grown into its compact entitlement. It on average uses 4.4 million acre feet of water a year. And I can tell you, even with our population growth over the last 50 years, we have not increased that water use significantly. In the lower basin, instead of using 7.5 million acre feet a year out of the main stem, they've been using 8.8 million acre feet out of that river. It hasn't been the 50-50 split that was envisioned, which would be fine if the upper basin could slowly grow into its water use and as was envisioned. But what we could realize is there's no more. There's nothing there to grow into. Okay? And it's really hard because for decades, our ethos in Western Colorado and in our state and in the upper basin has been, we will develop that. We will put all of these water resources to human use, and we will make sure we consume our entitlement, and we'll back every development project we can find. That's not where we are today, and I think no one in our state thinks that's what we can do. I will say that, you know, don't forget Mexico still gets $1.5 million. That's, I mean, the math otherwise was pretty bad at 90% of the people. So Mexico gets the other 10%. That's a total of 14.7 million acre feet a year that we have been consuming. The river during the same 10-year period provided 12.8 million acre feet of water. So why is it that Lake Powell and Lake Mead are in a crisis and are dropped below 24% of their capacity last year before we had a nice wet winter this year? It's because we just are using too much water, right? We're not, there's a mass balance equation to anything in natural resources, and we're not meeting it in the Colorado River Basin at all. So what is part of that? You know, the part of their 8.8 million, because I would just tell you real quickly, the lower basin says they don't use 8.8 million. They say they use less. And I'll be fair, that's what they claim. What they forget is there's a lot of evaporation off of Lake Mead, Havasu, a couple others, Mojave down there. Their evaporation just off Lake Mead every year is on average 800,000 acre feet of water evaporating off into the air, right? The biggest reservoir in the state of Colorado is Blue Mesa Reservoir. It has 890,000 acre feet. So it's our biggest reservoir that just evaporates every year. And then there's also something called transit loss. So if you hold your water in a reservoir for your benefit and you're delivering it to your crops 200 miles away, in our state and every other basin state, you get dinged for the delivery, the evaporative loss that occurs, or the transit loss that occurs from your point of release at your reservoir to your point of delivery at your ditch head gate. And the lower basin, they don't get dinged for that. They don't get dinged for the evaporative loss on those reservoirs. The evaporative loss in Lake Powell, Flaming Gorge, Blue Mesa, Navajo, those are all part of our 4.4 million acre feet of consumptive use in the upper basin. That's all wrapped up in there. We agreed to that in 1948 when we entered into an upper basin compact. And so we knew that we would have that evaporative loss assessed to us, not in the lower basin. And so that's one of the major sticking points right now between the upper and lower basin is how do you balance a system if you've got a total between those two of 1.5 million acre feet a year that is not accounted for in the current federal accounting. So that's part of why we're way out of balance. So system storage right now, as I said, last year at this time, the Lake Powell and Lake Mead were both at about below 25%. Today they sit at 37 and 33% respectively. That's great, right? That's pretty remarkable. And I will just say we, 1 year here in 2023 rebounded significantly the storage in these reservoirs. Now, it may have caused huge problems for folks on the Ladder Ranch and other places with all that snow and impacts from on wildlife, certainly. But it does help from a water balance perspective. As you can see, we're nowhere near out of the woods in the Colorado River Basin. I mean, these are major water vessels that all of this population and all of this irrigated agriculture has been built up around. I'll point out the way the system works here that's important. The roughly 50 million acre feet of potential storage in the system sits above all of the water users in the lower basin. So as they need water, over the last 23 years, they pulled it out of storage, mainly out of Lake Powell and Lake Mead, and applied it to their uses down in the lower basin. There are no major storage buckets above our water users in the upper basin. We have some reservoirs. I don't know if you heard about the White River Storage Project yesterday. In your tour, it looks like you did it 2 days ago. We are trying to build new ones, whether it's in Wyoming, whether it's in the White River, down in the Uncompahgre River. We've got lots of good ideas as to how to create more buckets. And I just want to say, they're relatively small buckets. Some of the ones that like the one Pat's working on and that we've got working on down in the Uncompahgre. What we're trying to do is develop storage that allows us to mitigate the impacts of climate change. right? Store in the wet years and then be able to release it so that we can help stream flow and irrigated agriculture and even some of our smaller cities that don't have reliable water supply. It's a remarkable challenge to be able to build any kind of storage facility today in the United States. Certainly in our state in Colorado, there's not a very friendly atmosphere towards any storage. Our state's water plan says that it is in favor of storage, says that it is in favor of multi-benefit storage. They constantly our state's administration is constantly opposed to any storage. And the reason for us that this is so important is that we actually have proof of concept within our state as to how these high mountain reservoirs can help all of the users, all of the needs along the river. In and I'm just going to go through a couple of examples, but in 2018, we had a drought year that up in the Yampa Basin was as bad or worse than 2002. So it was really one of the worst drought years. We jointly own a reservoir with a number of entities, but the major other owner is Tri-State Generation and Transmission, so a power production company. It's called Elkhead Reservoir, and we own this. We built our storage with the intent to have it be used in consumptive uses related to oil and gas, oil shale, and agriculture. The two, oil and gas and oil shale, has not really developed in that basin, and oil shale probably will never develop. But we have this bucket of water that sits largely unused. And so we saw this drought hit, and the first time our division engineer up there ever wanted to put a call on the river. So what we turned is in late July, as all of our family ranchers up there were being forced to take their herds off of public land due to the condition of the range. They were bringing them back to their home base, and they were all relying on pumps to get water out to their cattle, irrigate their last crop of hay. And the division engineer said, time to call the river and turn off all these pumps. When there's not enough water in the river, there was a senior water user who may or may not have been getting enough water. And the organization stepped up and said, well, how much water needs to be in the river in order to pay that call off? You know, what do we need to release? So we just started releasing water out of our reservoir to meet the call, even though no one was paying us, no one was dealing with it. Well, the division engineer got furious with us that we were taking her call off the river. We were helping the ranchers stay in priority. I will just say, after we were done with it, state engineer agreed, overrode the division engineer, helped us get that through. But it was us, it was Tri-State, it was the local community who made that happen, and they put those ranchers back with water, right? Many of them still had to deherd. They didn't have enough feed for their cattle that winter. But we tried to do a lot, and I think we helped a number of families. The state, and I think this is one of the things that we're running into constantly, is we have to be creative in these really dry times and unanticipated ways. And you have to use your water in different methods. And it really, the Yampa is a perfect example. We now have an ongoing program with the local communities that's sanctioned by the state, that we can do that. We can implement it anytime that drought condition looks like it's going to show back up. We fund most of that from the Colorado River District. We're getting some local help from a water fund that's been set up in the Yampa to do that. But I want to just, one other example is in the same year, 2018, we had a situation where the endangered fish stretch right here in the Grand Junction area, the 15-mile reach, critical reach for our four endangered species. And the river was incredibly below the flow targets. Flow targets in the summer, late summer, about 810 CFS. We were seeing it below 400 CFS. We were very concerned about losing large portions of the endangered fish population. At the same time, if you go upstream, there's an incredibly important, viable, commercial, recreational industry that is both fishing and river raft. And the river temperatures in those tributaries in the Roaring Fork and the Frying Pan had shot above 70 degrees, and we closed all of the fishing. And so we had commercial fishing getting hit and boating. We had fish dying up there, the trout. We had fears of the endangered species being dying. So we have a bucket of water that's actually owned, the facility is owned by the Bureau of Reclamation, called Rudai Reservoir. And it was built, just as an aside, to compensate the west slope for a trans-mountain diversion that brings water over to the Colorado Springs area. And so they built this project so that we would have it to meet our needs on the west slope. We bought that water, a whole bunch of it from the Bureau, and manage it. We did it again with the intention to do oil and gas and oil shale. And those industries, again, haven't developed the way we thought they would. And so we had this water, and we said, let's release it. Let's send it out. We'll figure it out later what happens. So we brought the temperatures in those streams back below the threshold. We brought them down below 65 degrees. The commercial fishing and boating was reinstated on the river. We delivered that water down here at Palisade to the power plant that sits right down here. So we had a beneficial use where we were under a state law delivering it to the power plant, running it through a hydroelectric power plant, and then running it back into the 15-mile reach. And so we increased the flow in the 15-mile reach by about 200 CFS. We made hydroelectric power. We helped the fish up in the upper stream. And it's that kind of collaborative work that we've got to find. Now, we didn't do that on our own. We found a partner in ExxonMobil who owned water at the time. They helped us do it. The city of Aspen, the city of Basalt, the city of Glenwood Springs, the county of Garfield, all along the river, they all had small portions of water there, and they contributed for free to make sure we could do this the right way. That's the only way I think we as a society are going to actually survive this ongoing drought, is through this kind of collaborative work where you push people beyond their normal thought patterns, right? Especially the lawyers. They get really upset about this stuff. I just talk about that, and I want to turn to the criticism of that, right? And the threats that we're seeing in the basin. So the Colorado River is way out of balance. And you will hear frequently, especially from our city brethren, well, 80 to 90% of the water in the Colorado River is consumed by agriculture. And I will say in my state, that's probably true. About 80% of water is actually consumed, because we've looked at that. I don't know that that's true, Pat, as we've talked about at family farm lines. I don't know that that's true in the entire Colorado River Basin or the West, but in your state, the actual consumptive use numbers play out that ag consumes about 80% of the water that our state consumes. I can't tell you guys this, but ag, people say, oh, the ag's got to stop growing stuff. I'm like, well, I said, I don't know. I'm not a farmer. I have family members who are, but I'm not. I'm like, well, I don't know. I can't consider myself part of ag because I'm the one who eats the food and drinks the beverages and consumes all that. And if you're doing that, that's remarkable. But we're all creating that demand, right? And so it is really easy for the 40 million people who live in the cities and their water policy folks to say the water's got to come out of ag. And it creates a huge concern for our district, and especially in our headwaters. And I'll get into the stream flow issues that I think you're familiar with. But the real issue here is that the solution to this water shortage isn't that we need to have less people, or that we need to figure out how to share the shortage. It is, let's just take it right out of ag, and let's pick a few crops that we can demonize. Right? Let's look at alfalfa and only look at the negatives of alfalfa, and let's actually get even worse. Let's get xenophobic during a time where international tensions are bad already, and let's start talking about the damn Asian people who are growing it and consuming. Well, let's remember for a minute, the country grew exporting agricultural products. We have always been an exporter of ag. That's how our economic engine in our country has survived, right? The export of alfalfa is no different than the export of silicon chips from all of the chip plants that are being built in Phoenix right now, right? by the way, unsustainable water that they're going to have to take one day to the ag in Arizona or somewhere else in order to sustain those chip plants. They're exporting water just like the ag industry is, quote, exporting water. So what drives the market in agriculture? The market, right? The demand. If we as a society don't want to grow these crops, then we ought to probably stop consuming dairy and meat products. Right? I'm not likely to do that. I'll just be honest. But I think it's hard for people in cities totally disconnected from their food supply to understand their relationship to that. Right? I mean, look, I can make fun of the River Basin. I think I have today. We'll say I eat leafy green vegetables all winter long. They come from Yuma or the Imperial Irrigation District or some other country. And I'd much rather they come from Yuma or the Imperial Irrigation District, right? It is remarkable the production of food that comes out of the Colorado River Basin for our entire nation. And so it's local, regional, and national food security that we're talking about when we talk about, well, just reduce your agricultural irrigation footprint, right? So that being said, the question is, can ag actually contribute to the solution on the shortage, right? And I think we can, but this is where it gets, I think our mission intersects with yours very well. And it has to do with the benefits of irrigated ag that we see on our rivers, and we focus a lot on the aquatic habitat and not so much the bird habitat, but they're all related, right? And so, maybe I'll just keep talking on this page. So our whole country, we sponsor. Go back to 2020. Our district is a property tax funded district. We our 15 counties all chip in on our property tax base. And then I came into my job in 2018. And there were two big challenges we were facing, which is climate change and the production in water, and then these weird implications of our state's constitutional provisions on my budget at the Colorado River District. We had two weird amendments to our constitution that were driving our revenues down, even though the demand for our services is going up. And so in 2020, we went to our voters and said, hey, can you double our tax base? Remember, 2020 is the year Trump got elected. It wasn't a real popular year for government. People were feeling pretty upset with government. We said, this is what we're going to do with money. We're going to invest it in productive agriculture, healthy watersheds, healthy rivers. We said, here are 5 different buckets. We're gonna spend it in infrastructure, and we're going to invest this money. And for a little district, right, a population of only 500,000. We increased our taxes by about $5.5 million a year, and we are getting between $4 and $5 million of that into a fund to invest in water conservation and water efficiency projects in our area. Now, it's not just that. So we've sponsored a whole lot of projects down here in the Grand Valley and throughout our district on urban water use, getting cities to change their land use codes and their building codes. We've invested a lot of money to help certain areas in our district become more efficient, but not others. And that is something that a lot of people have a hard time with. I think we're in the White River and got a preview of the White River return flow study earlier this week. I haven't yet seen that, the results of the study. We did pay for it, but I haven't yet gotten a chance to look at it. We are quite convinced that those agricultural return flows from irrigated ag are essential to the health of the river and to the health of the aquatic system, to the health of our agriculture that depends on those return flows downstream. And so 10 years ago, our board said, we're not investing in efficiency projects in our headwaters counties. We're not going to pay for sprinklers and pay for canal linings and those kind of efforts, because we believe that return flow is not waste. We believe that return flow has huge benefits. And in fact, we've gotten the assistance in that from our recreational community, who is dependent upon that cold water return flow in the river so that people like me can go out and fish in August, September, and October for trout, because those trout wouldn't be there without that ag return flow, right? We're very aware of that connection. But we do have areas that we have some interesting, this area here in Grand Junction, if you go up to the lower Gunnison Basin, this all used to be seabed, right? This is Mancos Shale. Mancos Shale, when irrigated and when you have deep percolation, actually brings high loads of selenium and salt into the river system. That actually really hurts our four endangered fish. It hurts some of the other native fish. It creates water quality issues for our agricultural users. And so together with our state and federal government, we teamed up in the lower Gunnison area to invest in, and we utilize, I will just say, River Reclamation Salinity funds combined with NRCS PL 566 funds and some regional conservation reserve program funding as well. I have one of my engineers who was the main advocate on that, literally lost decades of his life because of the stress of trying to get federal agencies to work together on that. And the grant, I mean, on the same project, we literally had to do 2 different NEPA analyses and spend 10 years doing federal environmental compliance over again because the NRCS wouldn't take the Bureau's NEPA work, right? And our senators were very helpful, but they couldn't get through them. It was amazing, right? We have made progress. Pat, myself, others have spent a lot of time in DC pushing, and we're making progress on making those programs a little more efficient, but it's really hard to do that. In the Lower Gunnison, we pipe canals, we put on farm efficiencies. We had the Gunnison River was on the 303D list in our state for selenium and salt. It has now been dropped off of that list, and we are far below the selenium standards, way below where we ever thought we would be. So 10 years later, that program will. What I'm saying is it has to be site specific. And my concern, even in the Lower Gunnison Basin, is that we impacted migratory bird habitat by drying up wetlands when we put those canals in those ditches in pipes. We did mitigate some of that, but we didn't mitigate it. I'll be very upfront about that. The question is, how do you do that in a way that actually works for the migratory birds, that works for the fish? Because here we were focused on water quality in the river, and we're hurting the migratory birds and reducing their habitat, right? And so how do you do that in a way that's more informed? I will tell you, I would love to work with your organization and here in Western Colorado to find out ways to do that better. And we have great habitat for migratory birds that is under threat, not just because of this drought or climate change, but also because of our growing cities. You look at this area in the Grand Valley, or you go up back to our largest project, the Uncompahgre Valley, you look at these areas and they are urban. And when you take off, if you guys are flying out of here today or tomorrow, look down as you're flying out. It is so clear that what used to be irrigated ag is now subject, right? And so that too is impacting our habitat for all of our wildlife and return flows for our fish. And so how do we deal with those issues? On water conservation, one of the things we're working on, just so you know, is working with both of our biggest projects in Western Colorado when they're pushed to engage in water conservation, to leave water in the stream for either the lower basin or for the fish, trying to find ways that it is, when they take land out of irrigation, that it is non-food production land. So we have this organization, and our push right now is to try to restructure those irrigation companies' stock so that they can create a second class of stock for their residential water users. And we can turn them off first, essentially, so that the food and fiber production and the flood irrigated land can stay in place for the wildlife habitat in the production of food. I think that is going on throughout the West right now in many of our projects. And the question is, how do we do it effectively and efficiently? Anyway, we do, again, depending on where, right, in the last 3 years, we funded 1.3 million on productive ag and conservation and efficiency. I will just say we've got a really exciting project I can't talk a whole lot about, where we're about to buy historic water rights for a hydroelectric power plant upstream in Glenwood Canyon that will keep water flowing west instead of being sucked over the mountains. It's senior water right to all of the trans-mountain diversions. That is something we can do without impacting negatively ag. And in fact, once it comes out of that hydro plant, that water gets used for the irrigated agriculture in the main stem of the river, and it also gets applied to it benefits tremendously this 15-mile reach year round. And so we are looking for things that don't actually attack ag.
That's the industrial agenda of things. Reaching out, we have seen the water rights. People who choose the water rights are now get dollars to get options on. Right here, they would have options on the drag water. And I didn't see that coming at the level that it's at this first year's they're offering. So that would be another kind of big bite out of the apple. Time when it would be the most important to have water. They're asking to have the option to have that. Just got to start, kind of figuring out all the different connections. It's more sophisticated than anticipated. The other thing I'll say is, are you going to get a PhD credit for this presentation?
Thanks. I do want to say, so for people who are online who couldn't hear Pat entirely, Pat pointed out that, hey, we've got a lot of our ag users who are being individually approached by cities and others to get options on their water during dry times. Here in the Grand Valley, it's even worse. This water scarcity. So one of the efforts, I think you may have read about it, one of the efforts in the river has been to say, hey, look, we need to develop something called a demand management program in the upper basin, where we target consumptive water users, primarily agricultural water users, and we pay them not to consume water. And the idea is that it's the quote low value water. It's not the $70,000 an acre foot water that we're seeing in the metropolitan area being sold and swapped between cities. It's maybe it's $5,000 an acre foot or something in that range to buy. And I say, well, let's do that. Let's rent it from the farmers and let's put that program in place and create a market for water that we can then lead in the river to help balance the river. Now that creates all sorts of issues along what we just talked about in terms of irrigation, return flows and the benefits to wildlife. And frankly, all of our small communities that depend upon this agricultural economy, right? And for us in Colorado, you saw some of our really beautiful cities or towns yesterday. We have them all over the place. They're awesome, functioning small town America. They're not your desolate Midwest towns that are going away. They're thriving. They won't thrive if ag goes away, right? And so the idea that we would pay people to stop concerns us. Well, it doesn't concern everybody because we've got a hedge fund named Water Asset Management that is now the single largest landowner here in the Grand Valley, in the Grand Valley Water Users Association. It's our biggest project down here. They bought over 3,000 acres. They spent about $20 million, and they're out there buying it more. And since they got in such negative press, we found that we think they're buying it under all sorts of different names now, different addresses, different contacts. We've been trying to track it, but we haven't tracked it entirely. Why are they investing? Well, before they knew people were paying attention, we used to tune into their investor conferences, which they were very happy to have broadcast anywhere because they're looking for millions of dollars. And they said, look, this is a great opportunity. Water's the new currency. We're going to pay it up, and then we're going to get paid not to use it. I mean, we're just going to buy huge swaths of the most valuable irrigated land in Western Colorado, and we're going to do it in the river when we get paid by the federal government to do that. Right? And so the state has had a huge problem trying to figure out how to deter speculation, because the feds and our state are talking about setting up this market with billions of dollars from the infrastructure program, and we're we're saying you're screwing, you're going to screw the whole marketplace up. And instead of competing against just subdivisions, we're now competing against hedge funds for ag land, right? So they've driven the price of ag land up in this valley to a point where you can't pay for it and expect them to make a return if you're growing food, right? So why are they investing? Because they're waiting for that market to develop. We've been successful in stymieing the development of that market so far, but it is likely to come. If we see, which we think we will, the hydrologic pendulum swing back in the next few years and the reservoirs start dropping again, we're going to see huge pressure on ag to enter into these programs. And if they're not set up right, we're going to see an incredible loss of wildlife habitat, of food production, and we're going to see our family farmers go away. And it's going to change the very essence of the communities that you've seen and are experiencing out here. This is just an example. I think the basic science here is something all of you understand because it benefits wildfowl, migratory birds. But this is this guy here in the picture is actually an old friend of mine. He's a rancher in the Upper Gunnison, Bill Trampy. Bill served on our board for a long time. And they are busy investing in trying to restore their meadows and create, even in these times of drought, wet meadows that benefit habitat. Now in the Gunnison Basin where he is, it's the Gunnison sagegrass that is very important there. And so they're fitting the Gunnison sagegrass, they're benefiting other wildlife, and they're keeping their land productive in doing this. And it's a really remarkable project that we've invested in, our state's invested in. A lot of people would say that in today's world, we're wasting water. So something to think about. We talked about the value of ag, but from our perspective in Western Colorado, if you take ag out of production here, even 10 or 20%, we can see all of our vertical industry processing plants go away. So our small packing sheds, our labor force will disappear. You go down, for instance, to the Palo Verde Irrigation District in California, the #1 right in California on the Colorado River. They entered into a fallowing program with Metropolitan Water of Southern California, the LA area. And they are drying up in any given year up to 29% of their ag land. Well, the other farmers who are trying to stay in business can no longer find labor because the demand for that migratory labor has changed so much just with that 29% of labor. They can no longer grow crops on the property that's not in that fallowing program because of the problems here. Their local feed stores, their tractor stores have all gone out of business. We're going down there to visit them to see how their program was working. And I thought, well, I always hear from the people who make a lot of money from the program because I know them. I want to find out what the local Chamber of Commerce thinks of this whole program because what's happened to Main Street. So I get onto their website and I'm like, well, who's in the Chamber of Commerce? There wasn't a single tractor store. There wasn't a single farm and ranch supply store. There wasn't a computer store. It was Metropolitan Water of Southern California. It was the city of Phoenix. It was everybody who wanted their water. It was the people here in this valley, Water Asset Management. They were part of the Chamber of Commerce in Blythe, California, and in the Palo Verde system. And so I said, well, that's not who I want to talk to. So I called the town hall and got a hold of their vice mayor, who was one of the few landowners who's still trying to farm. And he said, I'll talk to you about it. So we talked to him, and it's been miserable. They're Matt will tell you, oh no, we've invested in this community development fund. We're helping. I said, what's your biggest accomplishment with your community development fund since you've had such an economic hit with the loss of ag production? Well, we got a new subway in town. We funded that. That's for economic development, right? A subway. And that's where we had to get much because there were no local businesses that served.
Excited. I've been 3 times by those guys saying the family farmland should support us buying up this water. And it's so aggressive.
Yeah.
As you know.
Yeah. This is just our funding project, over 7.9 million, and that we've invested, but more importantly, from our perspective, we brought in another 66 million from federal and state sources into our district. So there are ways to do this. You guys were talking about funding. This is a small funding program compared to some of the federal programs, but it has really served as a catalyst to drive our values in our local region and make our efforts. By weird happenstance, we've had a huge increase in the valuation of our property in our district, and we're actually about to double our available funding in this program starting next year. So it's a reinvestment that is really critical for the survival of our communities. So I'm done yapping. I told you I could talk forever. If you have any other questions, please let me know.